Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors have agreed to pay $100 million in fines for misleading customers about the fuel economy of hundreds of thousands of cars sold in the US. President Park Geun-hye calls on Korea to develop an education system that produces happy and creative individuals, as the future of the country depends on new ideas. First, with a matter of hours before polling stations open for midterm elections in the US, polls show the Republicans are on course to grab control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Tuesday, November 4th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. And we start with the news that Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, by far the largest automakers here in Korea, have agreed to pay $100 million in fines and forfeit $200 million in credits for misleading customers about the fuel economy of cars they sold in the US.
Now, the penalties announced on Monday in the U.S. are the largest in the 50-year history of the so-called Clean Air Act. Shin Se-min reports.
Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors have been hit with a record fine of a combined $350 million in United States for overstating fuel economy standards on more than 1 million automobiles. That was a settlement reached on Monday between the Korean Auto Group and U.S. authorities. The fine itself amounts to $100 million. Under the terms, Hyundai and Kia will also forfeit greenhouse gas emission credits worth over $200 million and spend another $50 million on measures to prevent violations in the future. The penalty is the largest ever issued under the Clean Air Act. David Zachowski, the president and chief executive officer of Hyundai Motor America, said in a statement that his company had acted transparently, reimbursed affected customers, and fully cooperated with the investigation, and that the company was pleased to put the issue behind them. Hyundai and Kia conceded in 2012 that they had overstated fuel efficiency standards by between 1 to 6 miles per gallon over the previous 2 years on automobiles sold in the U.S. They agreed at the time to compensate drivers of the affected automobiles by issuing debit cards. That admission came after the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency investigated more than a dozen Hyundai and Kia models for fuel efficiency discrepancies in response to consumer complaints. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea is expected to post its largest ever trade surplus for the whole of this year on the back of falling global oil prices. The Trade Ministry said the cumulative surplus logged $36.7 billion as of the end of October. That's more than $1 billion higher than the same period last year. Korea posted a record yearly surplus of $44.1 billion in 2013. The ministry says that if oil prices remain steady and oil imports do not jump drastically over the next 2 months, this year's surplus will top last year's. And Korea's consumer prices rebounded for the first time in 4 months in October, but the inflation rate remained in the 1% range, where it's been now for 2 years. Statistics Korea says prices grew 1.2% last month from the previous year. That falls well below the central bank's inflation target band of 2.5% to 3.5%. The agency attributes the slow growth to the falling prices of farming goods and crude oil. Deregulation is a key part of the Park Geun-hye administration's plan to boost the domestic economy, and as part of such efforts, the Korean government is easing restrictions within its free economic zones to make them more attractive for investment. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
The Korean government is easing regulations on its 8 free economic zones to increase the number of developers and thereby make it less of a pain for businesses to invest there. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says it will lower the minimum requirement of developmental areas from the previous 330 to 200 square meters. The move will also give investors a higher rate of return, as the minimum reinvestment rate is being lowered from 25% to 10% of the profits generated from operating within the zones. Given the benefits, the move is expected to boost the number of private investors, as landowners and their associations will now be able to participate as developers of the zones. The ministry says it plans to raise $20 billion worth of economic benefit from the zones over the next 10 years. There are currently 88 districts within the 8 free economic zones in Korea. A zone in Chungbuk and the East Coast Free Economic Zone were added to the list last year as part of efforts to revive the local economy. But despite a number of measures introduced over the years, more than 40% of the districts are currently undeveloped due to low participation. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, we talked about how the drop in oil prices has boosted the nation's trade surplus, and as we can see in this trend, raw material prices have been dropping like a stone in recent months due to growing concerns over an economic slowdown in major economies. Now, going back to global oil prices, a data compiled by financial institutions in Korea shows that global oil prices have fallen by around 25% over the last 4 months alone. Brent crude and Dubai crude are down 23% and 22% respectively compared to the end of last year. The price of gold, corn, copper, and other base metals are also sharply down. Analysts attribute the fall to a lack of demand in the world market compared to excessive supply, and worries the end of the U.S. Fed's bond buying program, which has strengthened the U.S. dollar, will lead to a capital outflow from emerging economies. They say prices will remain low for the time being.
Now, education has been a major part of Korean society for decades, for all of history really, and a special event took place in Seoul today where education experts from all over the world gathered to discuss ways to improve global education. President Park Geun-hye was there herself, and she talked about fostering creative talents for her envisioned creative economy for the country. Choi Sun reports.
The zeal of Korean parents for their children's education is renowned. And it would be fair to say that this fervor and the rapid development of education in Korea have largely contributed to helping the country rise from the ashes in a matter of just decades. But President Park Geun-hye at a symposium co-organized by Seoul and the World Bank on Tuesday said the time has come for the Korean education system to transform in the face of new challenges in the 21st century. The president referred to her talks with World Bank President Jim Yong-kim last year, when they agreed that innovation and creativity were the foundations of sustainable growth, and that it's education that can foster such creative talents at the center of a creative economy.
저는 우리 교육이 혁신을 이루어낼 창의적인 아이디어와 도전 정신을 키워내는 원천이 되어야 한다고 생각합니다. 개개인의 잠재된 능력을 최대한 끌어올려서 아이디어와 열정으로 가득한 융합 인재를 길러내는 창의 인재 양성 교육으로 변해야 합니다.
Korea recently participated in the UN Global Education First initiative and joined the Global Partnership for Education, evidence that the government wants to play a more active role in international efforts to enhance the quality of education in the developing world.
그동안 축적해온 교육의 노하우에 선진국의 우수 사례를 접목하고 이제까지의 교육 패러다임을 뛰어넘는 행복교육, 창의교육을 실현해서 우리 교육의 발전은 물론 세계 교육의 발전에도 기여해 나가기를 기대하고 있습니다.
Promoting Korea's hosting of the World Education Forum next May, President Park expressed hope that the participants will have meaningful discussions on making happy and creative education possible for the future generations. Choi Sun, Arirang News.
North Korea has developed a new type of tactical missile after making improvements to a Soviet-era missile, which is capable of carrying nuclear, chemical or biological warheads. Non-proliferation expert Jeffrey Lewis from the 38 North website, which monitors North Korea's nuclear activity, says the missile was tested at least twice at a site northwest of the northeastern coastal city of Wonsan in late June and mid-August. The missile is believed to be an extended-range version of the Soviet SS-21 Tokha surface-to-surface missiles developed by Moscow back in the 1970s. Lewis says Pyongyang could develop a new series of long-range ballistic missiles based on this Russian model. Now, one of Japan's best-known writers has taken his own country to task for denying responsibilities for the bad things that Japan did during the war there. He also provided some insights into where the thinking behind the current administration may originate. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
Japanese writer Haruki Murakami has condemned his country for trying to evade responsibility for its wartime atrocities. In an interview with Japan's Mainichi Shimbun, Murakami noted that next year marks the 70th year since the end of World War II, but that Tokyo continues to miss the point that it was the assailant. Citing the Japanese way of thinking in regards to the war, the writer says that the Japanese believed they were the victims and that the emperor was exploited and its citizens deceived. Murakami added that eventually it was concluded that no one was wrong and that he understood why China and Korea feel resentment towards Japan today. Murakami says he saw similarities in the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. He said that Japan did not look into who was really responsible and instead placed the blame on the earthquake and tsunami, believing they were all victims. Murakami, one of Japan's best-known authors and a longtime candidate for the Nobel Prize in Literature, is famous for bestsellers including Norwegian Wood and the 1Q84 trilogy. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The International Telecommunication Union's meeting comes to a close in Korea's port city of Busan in just 3 days' time. And taking the lead of the host country, the ITU has adopted an agenda on promoting the Internet of Things. Our Song Ji-son reports.
The International Telecommunications Union for the first time adopted an agenda regarding the Internet of Things, which was proposed by this year's host, South Korea. IoT refers to the connection of devices and objects through the internet, and Seoul had proposed that it be facilitated to prepare for the future. Less than 1% of these objects are currently connected to the internet, but that number is expected to jump 10 times on the back of cloud computing and big data technologies, with the market size expanding by 5 times its current level to over $8 trillion by the year 2020. While the IoT stands to open new business opportunities for startups, supporting developing countries in their pursuit of the IoT remains a challenge for the ITU, as the resources in those nations are limited. According to the IoT index filed by the International Data Corporation last year, South Korea is the second most prepared country among G20 members after the United States, and with the latest adoption of its agenda, Seoul aims to expand its presence in setting global standards and supporting developing nations in IoT-related projects of ITU. Seoul's ICT Ministry has also designated IoT Week Korea 2014 from Wednesday to next Friday, where solutions and products related to IoT will be presented at multiple events at COEX and other locations around the capital and Busan. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
We're having quite a number of developments out of the U.S. on this Tuesday, and let's begin with the country's midterm elections. For the latest on this and other stories, we'll turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Now, Eunice, a chunk of government posts are up for grabs on this election day in the U.S. 1/3 of the Senate seats and all of the House seats there in the House of Representatives. And while his name's not on the ballot, President Barack Obama is very much at the center of this race.
Right, Mark. A lot of people watching on this Tuesday whether Republicans will take the Senate from the Democrats after this midterm election, as many see it as a referendum on President Barack Obama. The polls show we'll see many tight races today, showing the country locked in a deep political divide. Our Connie Lee has the story.
Voters in the U.S. are gearing up to cast their ballots in the midterm elections on Tuesday. It's an election seen as a poll on President Barack Obama.
These midterm elections are an up or down vote on President Obama in terms of his stewardship of the economy, what's going on in foreign policy, and also his overall popularity.
Many races are tight or too close to call, but recent polls have been forecasting Republican gains, with many showing them taking charge of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Voters will be electing candidates for all 435 seats in the House and 36 seats in the Senate. If Republicans hold on to their current seats and add 6 more in the House, they will hold a majority and make it a tough final 2 years for the Obama administration. On the issue of the economy, a Pew Research Center poll shows more voters believe the Republicans would do a better job than President Obama.
I don't think he's done a good job for what he said, and I don't think he was ever going to do a good job.
But there are others who think the president has a decent record.
I love him. He's doing all right. It wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I'm at today.
President Obama, supporting Democratic candidates at a rally in Illinois, reminded voters of his administration's achievements.
Over the past 4.5 years, our businesses have created more than 10 million new jobs. First time in 6 years, unemployment's below 6%. Housing market that was reeling is now rebounding. Auto industry that was wheezing is now roaring back.
The Ebola crisis and America's involvement in the fight against Islamic State are also factors likely to affect this year's midterms. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And staying with President Barack Obama, the U.S. leader hosted Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen at the Oval Office on Monday, ahead of his trip through Asia that will also take him to Australia for a meeting of the G20 this Sunday. That tour is to kick off this weekend. The White House said they talked about the near and long-term outlooks for the global economy, as well as that of the U.S. Wall Street reforms was also discussed as U.S. financial regulators are working on the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act aimed at strengthening the financial system following the 2007 credit crisis. The closed-door meeting was the first time the two met one-on-one since Yellen assumed her post as chief of the Federal Reserve back in February. 13 years after New York City's World Trade Center collapsed in the 9/11 attacks, One World Trade Center has opened its doors for business. At 541 meters tall, the skyscraper is the tallest on the Western Hemisphere. Its first tenant, publishing house Condé Nast, has begun to move in and will occupy 24 floors of the 104-story structure. More than half of the space has been leased, and the city's General Services Administration has signed up for a lot of the floor space as well. One World Trade Center also keeps the footprints of the old Twin Towers as a memorial, in addition to a museum. And finally, over in Japan, trekkers could soon be required to register themselves before scaling another mountain or face a hefty fine. The new law being drafted follows last month's unexpected Mount Ontake eruption that trapped hikers and left rescuers without a definitive list of people to search for. Our Connie Kim has this story.
In September, more than 50 people died when Mount Ontake, a popular hiking destination in central Japan, erupted without warning. Rescue workers raced against the clock to find those missing, but it was hard to identify them since most had not registered before setting out on their treks. It took authorities 2 weeks to get the full list of hikers on the mountain after combining information from police, the fire department, and local governments, and looking into every car parked in the area. A hiking declaration form is present for climbers at the trail entrance, but only few bother to fill it out.
It is not mandatory. We want them to fill out the form to protect themselves, but in reality, hardly anyone does.
The hiking declaration form is an essential resource for search and rescue operations in the event that climbers get lost or go missing. Last year, among 2,100 mountain accidents were reported in Japan. Only 370 hikers had filled out the form beforehand. In light of the recent Mount Ontake eruption, efforts are underway to make it compulsory for hikers to submit the declaration form. 20 local governments, including those with active volcanoes like the prefectures of Nagano and Shizuoka, are working together on setting the law. However, resistance is expected as hikers could face up to $500 in fines for not filling out the form. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics.
Korea is the 25th best country to live in, at least according to a British think tank. Its latest index touts Korea's economy and education, but says they would be well served to learn from other countries like Norway and Switzerland and other areas. Kwon So-ah has the story.
South Korea is the 25th most prosperous country out of 142 countries around the world, according to a Prosperity Index report released by the British-based Legatum Institute. This year's ranking is a notch higher than last year. Korea's best ranking was 24th in 2011. Norway topped the list for the 6th consecutive year. It was followed by Switzerland and New Zealand. The three most prosperous Asian countries are Singapore, Japan, and Hong Kong. The report says South Korea is the 5th best Asian country to live in. African nations filled out the majority of the bottom spots, with the Central African Republic propping up the rest. While GDP is usually the most common way to assess a country's prosperity level, the Legatum report says its definition of prosperity is more than, quote, just the accumulation of material wealth. That's why the institute measures countries by 8 categories. Korea performs strongly in economy and education, ranking 9th and 15th respectively. But the personal freedom and social capital divisions are weak.
Korea remains stuck in the mid-20 level because of its overall welfare situation. In terms of welfare systems, Korea is still an awfully long way behind countries like Norway and Switzerland, which are famous for their comprehensive welfare systems.
But analysts have expressed optimism that the government's latest efforts to improve its welfare policies could boost Korea's position on the Prosperity Index list in the coming years. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, the number of one-person households in Korea have been on the rise in recent years as an increasing number of young people choose to delay or even completely forego marriage. Now, this relatively new demographic has sparked off a so-called solo economy and a wave of new consumer trends. Our Park Geun-hye reports.
Single-person households now make up more than 25% of Korea's total households. Statistics Korea says the ratio will increase to 1 in 3 by 2035. The rising number of singles in the country has begun to make an impression on the economy, and their distinct lifestyle is changing the landscape of the consumer market. For example, home appliance companies have been keen to cater to their special needs, rolling out products like mini rice cookers and small-load washing machines to slimmer refrigerators. The businesses say solo dwellers prefer appliances that are well-equipped with multi-functions in refined and compact designs. Increased revenues for convenience stores is another indication of the growing presence of single-person households. Recent statistics by the Bank of Korea show the amount of credit card transactions from January to July at convenience stores this year has increased about 15% from the same period last year, while large chain retailers saw a decrease, largely due to a slump in consumer spending after the April Fair disaster. Analysts say an increase in sales for convenience stores is closely linked to the purchasing habits of single people. The purchasing power of solo dwellers has turned out to be stronger than that of 3 to 4 member households, according to the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
As the country's population of single people continues to grow, so has demand for single-person housing units and personal finance managers to help them prepare for their senior years alone. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, we had another cold morning, but the cold snap is easing as the highs will be rising today, reaching into the upper teens in many regions. And lots of sun has been shining down on us, and it will remain sunny all day long. But please note that the dry weather advisory remains in effect here in the capital, so be sure to stay hydrated and apply a good amount of moisturizer. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. Now, the daytime high in the capital will rise to 17, while Daegu, Gwangju, and Busan will climb into 18 this afternoon. Now, on to other regions. Jeju Island and Daejeon will be getting up to 16 later on, while Dokdo see a high of 15. And it seems like late autumn weather will persist for the remainder of the week under a good amount of sunshine. Also note that the winter is right around the corner, so be sure to layer up before heading out. That's all for now. Let's send it back to Mark and Jin-joo in the studio.
Well, thank you, Chien, for the weather update, and that does it for this Tuesday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Jin-joo and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.